Hello, you're listening to the first episode of Tied Together, brought to you by Cohaesus. My name's Kostov Bhattacharya, and I'm the CTO here at Cohaesus. In this first episode, I'll be chatting with Alex Lee, our head of experience, and diving into the topic of conversion rate optimization, which is a system for increasing the percentage of visitors to a website that convert into customers. So Alex, we're going to talk firstly about the whole area of conversion rate optimization, and I thought it would be a nice place to start for our listeners by explaining what conversion rate optimization is, or CRO as it's called in the industry. And it would be great to hear from your perspective, how you view CRO in your line of work and how it relates to the whole sphere of experience design.
Sure. So conversion rate optimization is all about understanding how customers are using your existing products and services, understanding how they're moving around them, and then coming up with experiments or hypotheses around how could we improve their experience and get them to their goal as quickly and as painlessly as possible. And kind of the way that we do that is to work together really to understand what is it that customers are trying to achieve and what do we as a business want them to achieve, to define where is that point of conversion. So that it could be in a traditional kind of e-commerce perspective, it could be making a sale, or it could be something smaller. A conversion could be getting a quote or viewing a product. So a conversion can be a different thing to different companies. But what we do is we want to define what it is we want customers to achieve. We then create testable experiments, which are ways of modifying the experience. So this is very much on the front end of digital experience. You can make tweaks to the user interface without changing the underlying code. And then we'll run an experiment for a period of time, usually 2 or 3 weeks, and then we can monitor how well that experience is performing. Is it better than the baseline or the version before we made any changes? And if it is better, maybe take that experiment and then turn that into the real code that everybody sees. So it's a really powerful way of trying out new things in kind of a safe space without investing too much tech overhead and like too many different teams. You can experiment with something to see how you can make the most out of your existing services. So quite a lot of our clients use it to reduce risk. You can try new things out without buying brand new software or completely changing your flow. So yeah, we find it a really useful tool.
And it sounds like it's a really good way to refine existing experiences, and optimize them versus sort of starting from scratch and rethinking everything, which ends up being a lot more effort and investment in cost as well, I guess.
Exactly, and especially in times like now in the kind of post-COVID crisis, where it's not the right time to be potentially investing in large-scale retooling and replatforming. So the opportunity for clients to get the most out of the tools they already have and to sort of squeeze the most value from every visit, make the most of every click is really important right now more than ever.
One of the key areas of focus for a lot of businesses is around the metrics and, what's the point of conversion rate optimization ultimately. And I guess a large part of it is basing it on measurable metrics. And I know in some of your projects in the recent past, you've had to look at that. Take us through a couple of examples of metrics that organizations typically look at when they're looking to optimize around CRO.
So there are very tangible metrics, things like average order value or potentially basket size if you've got an e-commerce kind of website. But there are other metrics around time to complete a process, or potentially even experience metrics that might be around how does it feel to complete a process, what was the friction like for the user. So before we start either a CRO project or really any experience project, we try to define the metrics up front to really understand what it is that the business can measure themselves by, and how can users measure how well or how badly their experience was with a company or a product and service. And then we break those metrics down into what are the individual elements or individual signals that we could measure that kind of give us an indication of whether we're achieving the metrics that we're trying to achieve. So with something like CRO, we might take the basket average order value or basket size, like I was saying before. But if we were looking at metrics in a higher experience level metric, we might be combining things like how many calls to your call center, or what's your net promoter score, or how many people are coming in store versus buying online. So by combining all these different insights together, we come up with an overarching kind of experience metric, which is a way of clients becoming more aware of the data and the kind of the behaviors that their customers are exhibiting, and they start to see how everything they do impacts one of those numbers.
I think that's a really nice way of juxtaposing or comparing how experiences were created before the days of data-led experience design. And I guess, we can think back on our careers and the sector in general and think about how things used to be done in the past. There was a big focus on the flow of, say, a website or an app. There was a big focus around visual design and the interaction design. But analytics and measurement often were consigned towards the last mile, the last stage where you throw in the tag and then you sort of report on things. And I think that whole space has come along. It's such a long way compared to those days. And I think now with the explosion of data that we're collecting from back-end systems, from user interactions with the front end, there's a whole wealth of information now to harvest and use and apply advanced techniques like machine learning and predictive analytics on top of. And I think a really exciting area that's been emerging over the last 4 or 5 years is around the measurement and use of the voice of the customer data. That is a phrase I think that was coined some years ago. One example that I can think of from a couple of years ago was working with a partner in the voice of the customer space, where they developed a platform that it processed any text-based information. So one of their early customers was a retail customer. And they would collect customer service call logs. They would look at, for example, chat logs that were saved during interactive sort of bot-like chat conversations, and look at survey data and many other signals anywhere where there was text information available. The platform would process this information and then start to segment and cluster commonalities in what people were saying. And when you logged into the back end, you could see this beautiful tree diagram that would visualize for you the magnitude of certain topics. And then it would apply sentiment and analysis on top of the magnitude measurements. And so you could see whether a large topic area, something that was very popular, being spoken about by customers, with either had negative sentiment or positive sentiment. And then you could map that against a continuum, a timeline, and see whether the run up to Father's Day or the month prior to Easter or Christmas was resulting in certain topics bubbling up with either negative or positive sentiment. And then that data really enabled that retail organization to be proactive and look ahead rather than being reactive after the fact something has happened or something's blown up in social media or whatever it might be. And I think the whole area of predictive changes to customer experiences is absolutely fantastic. Tell me a bit about your experience around predictive experience design, using data to look ahead and refining those experiences.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a super interesting space because data analysis is really a forward-looking exercise, like being able to use the data that you have to identify trends, to predict, as you said, sort of predict future behaviors, and then to adapt the experience based on that insight is a really interesting area. I did some work before with a finance institution looking at sentiment analysis, as you were mentioning, around call logs, and then using that to reprioritize the FAQ and help content in the digital space, so that when a customer comes to the FAQ section, we immediately serve them up the kind of content that we predict that they're likely to be looking at. And I think that idea of a way of using data to triage problems before they even occur is a really interesting way of doing things like reducing the impact on your call centers, which will obviously be suffering a big impact at the moment. I mean, you can also use that data to predict the kinds of item they're most likely to if you have a large catalog of items, and to use it to reprioritize categorization based on likely behaviors and things like that. But I think it's a really interesting area, how we can be insight led and use that to affect the actual experience that the customer has.
So Alex, to really bring it home for the listeners, I'd love to speak about a specific example from the recent past. I know you've got one already prepared in your mind. Please share it with us.
Sure. So we do a lot of work in the charity space, and right now charities are suffering with a large reduction in the amount of donations that they're getting from the public. And so we've been using CRO to identify the optimum time in which to talk to customers about making a donation. It's really important with charities not to drive customers away by potentially sending them a message which is completely out of context of what they're trying to do, and potentially interrupting them on what they're trying to do. So we've been running a whole process of experimentation to really understand what's the best time and what gives the best results for the charity. So it's been a really interesting area.
So we talk quite a lot about two different areas of measurements here at Cohaesus. One is around quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis, and the two are quite different and can reveal very diverse insights into our customers and the businesses that we are doing work for. Unpack the differences between quant and qual, and it would be great to hear from you, Alex, an example of where you've used either to good effect.
Yeah, definitely. So quantitative data is the large-scale numbers that we get from research. So it could be from survey data, or it could be from analytical data, such as people using digital products. And that's really, really useful to tell us what people are doing. But what that doesn't tell us is why people are doing it. So what we do is we use quantitative research to uncover the what's, and then we convert that into qualitative, very difficult to say, research to uncover the whys. So we'll use a piece of quant, for example, some analytics data where we were finding some interesting behaviors within a client, and then we use that to frame the research that we did, which was more of a one-to-one interviews, or it could have been a remote interview kind of process, in order for us to really dig into why they were making those behaviors. So it's important not to rely too much purely on data. I think data gives you some insight into the behavior that people are making, but you really then can use that to drive further insight into the reasons for that.
And then once you've done that analysis, I guess it really nicely flows into the decision-making process around the creation of the experience, and whether it's a refinement of an existing experience, or actually setting up an experimental experience modality, say in a e-commerce checkout flow or in a customer onboarding process that may be much more highly effective compared to how it was done previously, right?
Exactly. By combining both of those pieces of insight, you can then look to what are the activities that we could do to mitigate what that pain point is, or to shift that customer behavior, and then where is the best location for us to do it. So like you say, it could be something very small scale that we experiment with through something like a CRO program, or it could be something larger that could be more of a project, or even a strategic change for the client, but it's through that insight that we can start to define the next steps.
And that's all for today's episode. We'll be back next week. I'm Kostav Bhattacharya, and thanks for listening.